Okay, we're going live on bring up the Maamar. We're just going to continue. Hopefully, finish the Maamar. We don't have that much time. Erev Shabbos Kodesh. Happy Pesach Sheni to everyone. We're talking about the pasuk that says, quotes in the first pasuk of this week's parsha that says, "L'choisi HaBesulah," talking about the coin. The coin has now become impure, but to his sister, the virgin who's close to him, Asher lo ha'isel ish, that she was never with another man, meaning she hasn't been married. That's the literal translation. Lo yitmah, then you can, or according to others, you have to make yourself impure to be with at the burial of your sister, basically. And we're talking about this idea in Kedusha. We're talking about the Zohar is telling us that this is the idea that Hashem comes in his goyel through clothing himself in the garments of vengeance. He takes his sister, which is the Jewish people, out of goals. Right. So we don't have that much time, so we can't go do major chazara. We have the recording on the past class. The Zohar continues. Why does God ready to go and mamish spoil himself? He's ready to soil himself to fight the vengeance, to take the Jewish people out, to fight against those, the narrative against Torah mitzvahs and Yiddishkeit, against Mashiach, against the Beis HaMikdash. So why is he doing that? Because the pasuk says, for his sister, the virgin, lo yitama, he's ready and committed to becoming impure. These garments of nukma, which is the vengeance, which we talked about before, to take vengeance on the forces of impurities. The zimin le'sabasa, that he's ready to get himself ready to become soiled. Begina, why does he do it? La'akamallah, to go to pick his sister up. He has to, although in the process of saving and taking his sister out, in it comes that he has to get into the clothing of vengeance, and it's a dirty mission, so to say. But he does it for the purpose, because through that he's taking his sister out of the Golas, of the exile. Behind so the Rebbe explains. What does it mean that Hashem lowers himself? Mashma, from the word ishafel, like when someone sits down, and not just to sit down to lower themselves, but to descend into a place that's, I don't belong here, so to say. The Slavish Levushim, the Nekuma, to go into the garments of vengeance, into the mindset of vengeance, to go into the impure places, by klipos, and the klipos, which are another the shells that represent that only taking off the food, recovering the food from its real expression, to break off the siphoning that the forces of tumah take, like we said last class. They're siphoning off kedusha because the oris and the kelim, the lights and the vessels themselves are complete. It's the levushim, it's the garments that they're taking, with the expression of the garments, the lack of communication, so to say, or the miscommunication, that over there they can manipulate it to use it, like someone manipulates someone else's words. They give a life force to a bad agenda. So why does he do this? God is like a kohen. And as a priest, the kohen shouldn't become impure. The Gemara says God's like a kohen. Why does he do it? For the sake of the Jewish people. They legalize Yisrael Magalas. The Rebbe is going to finish off at the Maamar. Very strong point about this, but we'll wait till we get there. But why does Hashem do it? Is to go in to get his sister out, which is representing the Jewish people, and take them out of exile. Medrash tells us the great love Hashem has for the Jewish people. That God reveals and redeems the Jewish people. That he reveals himself in an impure place in order to redeem the Jewish people. Marshall is like an example of a kohen. The Medrash says, as a priest, he has tithings. He has to get it out of the place of impurity. The tithings fell into a cemetery. So what should I do? If I go into the cemetery, I become impure. I can't just leave the truma. It's holy. The tithings. We're not getting to the laws of Tum and Tara and Truma, but the laws of tithings, it's biblical, it's punishable by death. So if you can't leave it, in theory, the Kohen has to say pure. I'd rather go and impure myself, make myself impure. This moment, I shouldn't lose my time. The Medrash says the Jewish people are God's tithing. It's not just a concept, there's a verse to support this. The first of God's grains, and the first of the grains is truma. And like the truma that falls in, the tithings that falls in the cemetery, that God's tithings is in exile. The Beis HaKvar is in a cemetery. God's ready to impurify himself, to make himself impure. As if. To go take the Jewish people out. What does it mean? As if, because everything, this is all God's creation. But God created the boundaries of this world. I didn't say there's shtashlos. Kohen Ish Chesed is in the madregas of Chesed. It's in the madregas of Seder Shtashlos. And in Seder Shtashlos, in the system of the world, in the world of Chesed Batzilus, shouldn't be going into these places. But why does God go into these places manifest, clothed as a Kohen who? It's for the sake of the Jewish people, to save his tithing. On behalf of the Jewish people, he makes himself impure. That's what the Zohar was meant when he says that God is begina because to lift them up. What does it mean God goes into the impure place on behalf of the Jewish people? Because the Jewish people are God's sister. HaBesulah, like a virgin, a crybaby love that's close to him. That we're not, even though the Rebbe can explain, although that ish is not it's like you're saying, for instance, once the sister, once your sister marries someone else, so now that she's part of that family, you can't no longer, she's no longer the pure person she was before. You can no longer become impure for her. The ish also represents over here in the esoteric concept, it's talking about ace of Isha Sada, ace of the man of the field. Even if we're in an impure place, but we didn't get married to it. We didn't become part of that. We're not part of the ace of Isha Sada. And because of that, it's his sister. She's still a virgin. He goes and he makes himself impure to save her. Footnote's an important footnote, so we're going to learn at the start. The obvious question is that God is not just a Kohen, he's a Kohen Gadol. It's the high priest. The high priest is not allowed to become impure for his sister. Even though God's the high priest, not just any priest. And the high priest cannot become impure, even for his sister who's pure, who wasn't given over to the other person. This that says that God goes into a place of impurity, even though it's impurity, and he becomes impure to save his truma, his tithings, the Jewish people. There's different madregas, like I said before. There's Chesed Batzilus, is Isha Kohen, Chesed Batzilus. That's a lower madrega. So we're talking about a lower level, the level of how Hashem clothes himself in a simple Kohen, in a plain Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol. Bechina Zah, which is the Zer Ampin, which is the Midos of Batzilus. And in that level is where God encloses himself in the garments of Edom, like we said last class. In the how Edom behaves, the violence and the idea of nekama, of vengeance, becomes his garments, is the level of God as he's a regular Kohen. But the level of high priest that would either be the Keser, Keser, which is Archampim, which is the Ratzin, which is obviously higher than the Midos, than the attributes, or the intellect, Chachma. The Rebbe says in the parentheses, look in the Bir Zohar in the Ruach Chanukah, Shem Lamayel Mishtalshus, which is out of the system of creation, like I said before, only in the system of creation there's a Tameh, and there's a regular Kohen, and for him to go down into the world of Bri, all the way to the dirt that we're in, we find ourselves, put ourselves, however you want to say it, whatever the situation is, that for there, it's a Tameh. For that level of Kohen, for Zoh Batzilus, for the Kelim Batzilus to come into this world, all the way to the place of Lo Yitama, it's a Yerida. Shem L'mayel Mishtalshus. But those levels of Kohen Gadol is beyond the system. That's not the level of God enclothing himself in the methods of Edom. The level of Kohen Gadol is beyond the system of creation. Therefore, there's no such thing as becoming impure, because getting into the garments of Edom to save the Jewish people, that's only the level of Hashem, of a regular Kohen, which is Kohen-ish, which is the level of Atzilus. Again, just a side note, we started a little early, so we can go a little outside of the scope for a second. Let's just finish up here. He says this will answer the question of in the Marsha that's on the subject of Alikechem Koinu, Alehu Yisbarach Mechuna LeKoyin Gadol, Sha'as Latam Afilu Leven, Ki Koyin Gadol Hu Bechinas Arach. So the answer to this is evidently the Marsha asks a similar question over there that's brought down Alikechem Toimahu. So how did he bury Moshe? I think it's the Gemara. How did he bury Moshe? If Moshe is dead, so this answers the question. The Abish is a Kohen Gadol. That's the level of Kohen Gadol. If this Kohen Stam, then it is Tamim. Okay. In 1962, on the Rebbe's birthday, Yirach Nissen, the Rebbe spoke at length about this concept, and when the Rebbe made a siyum of Masechtas Pesachim, he finished the Masechtas Pesachim. The beautiful sikh that speaks about the idea of the Pidna Ben. The Pidna Ben is the Gemara finished off Masechtas Pesachim, that there's a Pidna Ben, and I forget who the Tana was who came to Pitnei Ben, and they asked the Mishayla, who makes the bracha? There's the bracha that the bracha of Pitnei Ben the father makes because he's paid his benoi, he's redeeming his child. But who makes the bracha on the Shechianu? The Shechianu made by the father is made on the Kohen. Never goes at length to discuss the halachic question of what's the Havamina. Why does the Gemara have to say that Pshita, that we know that the father is Mevarach the first one, but who makes the second one, and he didn't have what to answer, he went to the base medrash. His medrash says that the halach is that's how the Pesachim finishes off. The Rebbe goes into the whole question of why do you have to ask each part, and why knowing that the father makes the first bracha helps in the question on the second bracha. It's I think it's printed in the Kutasichas Chelik Yud Beis on Boy or B'Shalach. But that's the end of the Sikha. After that, the Rebbe goes in, that's not in the Ulachoto Sikha, it's not in the printed, and unfortunately there's no printed version of the Sikha, it's only in audio. The Rebbe continues to talk, that the Rebbe says this is the idea also of Geula, that the idea of Pidna Ben is Geula, God has redeemed the Jewish people. So the question is, how is it going to manifest? Because we know how things manifest. If it's going to be Av Mevarech, which would be Av, the father, the way Hashem is a father to the Jewish people, so then the galus comes in a miraculous way, and the geula, the redemption comes in a total miraculous way. The Maamar say the shtalshlus, we don't have to come on to anyone. It's not going to have to be vote like the Rebbe says. It's not going to have to go through a vote in the UN. It's not going to come through Achashverosh. It's not going to come through the White House. It's that Mashiach is not coming because there's a war over Iran, and this is another sign. That's a sign. There's going to be l'mal mederchat hava. There's going to be the father makes the bracha on both brachas. The goyel is b'nai b'chayr, the Jewish people, the firstborn of the Jewish people. His firstborn son, the Jewish people. But if it has to be kohen mevarach, if the kohen blesses, that's a shiloh. Then the question becomes, how does it work? If the kohen is mevarach, then it has to go to Sheder Shalshlos. If it goes to Sheder Shalshlos, could we have to come on to Achashverosh? Could we have to come on to the UN? So we see over here, this idea is the same idea here, that the idea that there could be a tumah is lo yitama, and this is seen as the fact that God is enclosing himself. There's even a tumah over here, and we have to say that the tumah, because it's your sister, you're allowed to be metame yourself, is the level of kohen. This is going a little bit against, because then the Rebbe says at the end they went to the base medrash and the paskin that av mevarach shnayim, that when it comes to the gula mitzvah shleima, it's going to be that the father benches both brachas. That's the halacha. The father makes the shechianu, and therefore, even the way it comes into Zman, it's not going to have to go to say the shtashas. Again, a beautiful sikha. Over here, the Rebbe seems to be talking about the fakert. On the contrary, that the first level, at least the level that we're talking about in this prophecy of Yeshaya, the Einim Zebah Mi'edem, which maybe is the haschalta de gula, maybe it will be stages, is going to be in a way of kohen shechesed. It's lo yitam. There's going to be a level of tomein. The Rebbe's going to be fighting. The Rebbe says that there's going to be fighting. The Abish is going to be fighting the forces of tumah to cut them off from what they're ciphering from chesed of like we said before, chesed vatzilus. Okay, back to the text. Well, Prati Seres, the Rebbe explains to a bit more detail. The pasuk sounds like this. What's so special about the Jewish people? As described in this pasuk, So the Torah says like this, to tell us how great is this sister, the Jewish people, that God is ready to clothe himself. The level of Chesed and Atzilus is ready to clothe himself in the level of the begodim of Edom, and then purify himself to be able to save the Jewish people. The pasuk describes the Jewish people in three levels. Number one, where God says to him, we're close to him. You have a sister, you're not so close to her. Jewish people are like your younger sister, a person's younger sister, you're very close to her. She was never with another man. The Rebbe explains, what does the pasuk mean to tell us in these descriptions, in the concept of baalei, of redemption? The pasuk says that who are you allowed to give to? Obviously to your parents. It says lisha'erei also to your sha'er, which is u'isha, your wife. If your wife passes away, of course the kohen becomes impure and participates in the burial and the funeral of his wife. So what's the pasuk adding? Also your sister. Not to be taken out of context, but there's halachas, obviously incest. To have relations with your sister, the Torah says, if a person were to marry his sister, it's a chesed. Chesed is a disgrace, will be translated. But the actual word chesed means kindness. In this world, we are not able to understand the way we are in our makeup of this world of Asiya, incest, to take your wife as your sister as a wife is a chesed, is a disgrace, it's wrong, and it's not what we do. But in the higher level, in the higher worlds, there is a concept of taking your sister as a wife. First of all, we had it in Torah, right? The first people that were born took their sisters. Adam and Cain and Hevel married their sisters. So in behind him, Sheish Madrega b'Knesset Yisrael, Shehi b'Knesset Yisrael. Sorry, in heaven, there's a concept of unification between a brother and a sister. Behind him, there's a level of the Jewish people in Shlomo Melech's description and throughout the Torah's description of the relationship between a man and a woman, and that represents, like Shlomo Melech tells us all about the Shir Shimon of Song of Songs, that's a relationship between God and the Jewish people. So that relationship is also in the relationship of intimacy between a brother and a sister. That she becomes a korev, she becomes his wife, even though it's a sister. What is the difference? Sorry. There's a level of Knesset Yisrael, there's a level of the Jewish people out there are sisters. And there's a level of wife and sister in the relationship with the Jewish people and Hashem. What is the difference? In the general, persons can be very close to your sister. You should be very close to your sister, but not in a physical way. Not to get physical or intimate, but to be very close, and that's the natural relationship between a brother and a sister. And you have it in, what is it? It's natural love, because you're siblings. And it's consistent love. You don't have to fight for the love, for the attention. It doesn't express itself outside, obviously, in a physical way. So in godliness, this represents the relationship the Jewish people have with Hashem in a consistent, natural way. It's natural to love your sister. It's natural to love God. There's no, we're having a bad day, or there's no divorce. There's no separation. There's no, we're not feeling the love. It's consistent. It's your sister. It's your family. It's your brother. And what is that in avodas Hashem? That's avodah of a tzaddik. A tzaddik is consistent. It's not a passion. It's not a bubbly relationship. It's consistent. That's the level of the tzaddik. That they are connected to the consistency of godliness. But a man and a woman that get together as a husband and wife, that's not the same relationship as a brother and a sister. And sometimes when there's a miscommunication, the wife will be offended by you. So if you're nicer to your sister, I think you care more for your sister than you care for me, right? All those conversations. But at the end of the day, so you have to build the love, and you have to support the love. You have to find the love. You don't know that you can marry this person. Sometimes find the person from other across the world. Not always is going to last. Sometimes it gets cut. It doesn't take so many years until you find that person. But there's a uniqueness, obviously, in a marriage versus a siblings relationship. To me, but where's the real pleasure? The real pleasure is in the chiddush. It's a unique thing that you're able to find each other. It's not a natural love, and that's a chiddush. That itself is not taken for granted. That kind of the pleasure in that is much greater than the pleasure you have in your consistent relationship with your siblings. But avoida, what is this in avoida? What's that bubbly relationship in avoida? That's the avoida of baalei, the returnee, the person who's struggling with their relationship with Hashem. There's ups and downs, there's going away, slamming the door, coming back. God turns his face, right? They say the kruvim turned away from each other. Right? I don't want to look at you. The Alter Rebbe says when the kruvim are so close, but they're so far. If they're not facing each other, right, the time of the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, God destroys the house. That's a marriage that's getting Chas v'Shalom destroyed. The kruvim don't face each other. Why don't they face each other? Because they're angry at each other. So they're looking in the furthest space from each other. Right? If you want to see the person, if you're back to back, you have to look all over across the world. All you have to do is spin around, turn around, you're looking face to face. And specifically by the Churban, the Kruvim were looking at each other because at that moment, it was the greatest moment of love. That's the Rebbe explains the idea of going into Galus. But in general, the idea of the Kruvim not facing each other, it's like the husband and wife are not looking at each other. So there's a chiddush there. It's not to be taken for granted. That's the avodah baalei teshuvah. And there's not one that's better than the next. There are different types of avodah, right? Yitzchak tells Esav, asili matamim, give me foods, matamim, plural, different tastes of food. I love both tastes. I like the sharp and I like the sweet. I like there's the consistency of the tzaddik and there's the chiddush of the baalei teshuvah. There's the sister and there's the shaver. You have to sometimes become tummy for your wife and sometimes become tummy for your sister to go get her out of the tomb. She was your sister, but she was never with another man. They call it Esav Isha Sada. She never went over to Esav. She never got married to Esav. It's not understanding. And we're in the exile. The Jewish people stayed steadfast to their relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even though there's reasons why we're in Golos, and included in that is sin. We stay steady with God, like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, which will give because of that relationship. Tzaddikim. Love, that we become close to, which also represents the relationship of wife, of marriage. That we never left God. God is committed to the Jewish people also, and He pulls us out of Golos. He goes out to rescue the Jewish people. And here the Rebbe says the punchline. The punchline is when a person asks himself, we wonder about the Golos. Why are we in Golos? Is we look as if sometimes, why did you choose us? The famous thing Fiddle on the Roof says, why did you choose us? And he speaks to God in his hard moment. So you have a job to do. Why do you choose us? And the point is that he didn't choose the job. You are the job. The Maamar says a wondrous thing. Again, that we're quoting on the Maamar Tzemach Tzedek. A gewaldige inyan, a gewaldige concept. The reason Hashem comes to Galus is not because He lost anything else there. It's the Jewish people themselves. The only thing He wants is the Jewish people. Not because there's sparks there. The avoid that the sparks is maybe the reason why the Jewish people are there. But that's not what God's attention. God doesn't care about the sparks, He cares about the Jewish people. Just to pick up the sparks, He would never go into the Makom Tumah. The Kohen Ish Chesed would not go to the Makom Ish Tumah, let them stay there. Although He said, why? Because the truma that he wants to get, the Jewish people, is the Jewish people, but not the sparks. Al-Iraq lo yitama, he's coming for Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people. The closeness, the dearness that God has to the Jewish people, his dear sister, his young sister, he's going to get her out of those, but just the sparks, let them stay there. But it happens when he goes in to get the Jewish people. By the way, the sparks also come out. You take a tramp, like they say in Hebrew, take a ride. If you drop a few pennies, you're not going to pick them up forever. It's yours. You're disappointed that you dropped them, but you're not going to get on your hands and your knees and pick it up. You're not going to start going through the mud to find it. If you lost your diamond ring, you're going to get on your hands and your knees and you're going to sift through the mud. Of course, if you find the penny, you're going to pick it up and put it in your pocket because it's yours. And you have to find the diamond. Then you'll find the coins as well. Finishes the Maamar. Simon Zohar, the Maamar says, it finishes with the Zohar. Amri Sol Yeshaya. The Jewish people come to Yeshaya, it tells us, it's prophets. Manu din di Yavid kol kach. So why does Hashem go so far for the Jewish people? That he speaks in the way of charity for the salvation. What does this mean? The idea is who's that ni that's ready, that bedavar b'tzedakah is Zav. Zav, he says, is the midos. The midos are the attributes, chesed, primarily. All the midos, the primary of the midos is kindness. Not to be so judgmental. Ani medavar b'tzedakah, what does it mean? Ani, that the chesed is speaking to tzedakah. It's to make tzedakah. God is, so to say, speaking, going into speech. Right? My words can be harsh. So I use the attribute of kindness to soften my words, and that's a charity. Why? Going into Dibur means to go into the kingship. Kingship, a king should be very harsh. How do you soften the kingship? How do you soften royalty? Is chesed has to go into the attribute has to go into speech, soften the words. So you read this is what it means. God lowers himself. Zoh. Like we said before, we're talking about chesed, into kingship. If they to save the Jewish people. Because from the level of Malchus itself would say, why the Jewish people go there? What do they do to deserve to go there? There's rules. Too much judgments. God has to soften the judgment. Bring chesed into the gevura of Malchus. But Talmudover, Malchus is full of judgments and rules and harshness, right? The king is harsh. Malchus is built from a harsh character. At least they have to project harshness. That's the job of the king. But just up to Malchus, they would never redeem the Jewish people. The soften, the wording, the communication. Like we know, chesed is masculine, and it sweetens the gevuras, which is feminine. Speech Malchus is feminine too. That's what it means, tzedakah, because Malchus tzedek. Malchus on its own is tzedek, which is judgment, without the hay. Saying, 1 second, the Jewish people, they belong there, right? What did they say? Why are the Jews any better than the Goyim? In tzedakah, when we put the hay, that means the hay represents the 5 levels of kindness, of which are the 5 expressions, sounds of the letters. Right? There's letters that are pronounced through our throat, through our cheeks, through our lips, through our tongue. There's different sounds that we make to make letters. Those are 5 sounds connected to the 5 attributes of kindness. Soften your tone, soften your communication. Don't be so harsh. Turning tzedek, judgment, into tzedakah, to charity. Yes, you're doing a favor. Yes, it's chesed. Yes, it's maybe not deserved, but nevertheless, it's my daughter, my sister's in there. We harshen, we soften the Malchus. The Jewish people are asking Yeshaya, how is this going to happen? He goes, how it's going to happen? Because Chesed is going to say, it's going to soften the gevura of Malchus. All right. It's a beautiful Maamar. I can learn it, the Tzedek, but something to go to the Shabbos table with. All right. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a happy Pesach Shem.